Hey, some really cool things about trig with fractions is you can actually use some manipulations to make the fraction disappear, which just generally makes things a whole lot easier. So in order to make these fractions disappear when you've got addition or subtraction, you do still have to follow the rules for adding and subtracting fractions, which is they have to have the same denominator before you try to perform the addition or the subtraction. But these two denominators in this first one, we're looking at this one here on the left, the two denominators that are there have no factors in common. So that means the least common denominator is just going to be the product of the two of them. So I'm going to write that out. The product of the two of them would be secant of x plus 1, secant of x minus 1. And then I would actually need that for both of those fractions. So I'm going to write that out long ways just in case you're a little rusty on this. Okay, so now if I change the denominator of a fraction, I have to also change the numerator in the same way that I changed the denominator. So for this first one, to create that common denominator, I had to multiply by secant of x minus 1. So I have to do the same to its numerator. So 1 times secant of x minus 1 would be secant of x minus 1. Same thing on the second one. In order to turn this denominator into secant of x plus 1 times secant of x minus 1, I have to multiply by secant of x plus 1. So when I multiply 1 times secant of x plus 1, I get secant of x plus 1. So now my denominators are the same, and they are actually conjugates of one another. So I know that when I multiply conjugates together, really nice things happen. So I want to go ahead and multiply those out. So that would give me secant squared of x minus 1. For the numerators, since I am subtracting here, I have to be kind of careful. So the first one's going to stay the same. The second one, though, I need to put it in parentheses, so that minus will affect both pieces of that second numerator. Before I go any further, I would need to distribute that negative. So that would give me secant of x minus 1 minus secant of x minus 1. Now while I'm at it, that denominator, as soon as I saw it, secant squared of x minus 1, I started thinking, gosh, that sounds an awful lot like one of our identities. And so secant squared of x minus 1 is actually the same as tangent squared of x. So I'm going to go ahead and rewrite that one right now. Now in the numerator, I do have some like terms. So I'm going to go ahead and put those together. Secant of x minus secant of x is 0, so those are gone. Then I have a minus 1 and a minus 1, which would be a minus 2. So now I've got a negative 2 over tangent squared of x. Now I ran out of room there. Actually, I can move the paper down here. Okay, now my job was actually to get rid of the fraction in this, and it's still a fraction right now. I've still got a numerator and a denominator. So I'm going to use one more identity to fix that. This is like saying negative 2 times 1 over tangent squared of x. And 1 over tangent squared of x, using a reciprocal identity, that would be the same as cotangent squared of x. So now this would be equivalent to negative 2 cotangent squared of x. And that would be as simple as I could make it. That would probably be the best thing to do for whatever it is I'm trying to do. Now you try that second example that's up there and answer it on the Google form.